She was blonde, bombshell, and built for the catwalk, a living mannequin so flawless that fashion's high priests lined up to worship her. Dior, Chanel, Valentino, Victoria's Secret. If a runway was made of marble and champagne, Karen Mulder walked it in diamonds. She was the face, the muse, the dream. But behind the airbrushed fantasy and soft-focus magazine spreads was a woman unraveling, or, depending on who you ask, a woman waking up. Because when Karen Mulder started talking, really talking, the world wasn't ready for what she had to say. Not the press, not the fashion industry. Not even the country that once worshipped her like a goddess in Gaultier. What spilled from her lips wasn't just gossip. It was the kind of thing that makes media handlers break out in a cold sweat and tabloids clear their front pages. She made claims, serious claims, disturbing, high-voltage allegations involving famous names, powerful men, and things that sounded less like a supermodel's memoir and more like a deleted scene from a Bourne movie. Claims about coercion, about strange retreats, and about intimate abuse behind the polished facade of fashion's elite. Within days, she was whisked away, medicated into docility, and locked up in a psychiatric hospital, against her will. Now, depending on which tabloid you trust or which PR-trained insider you believe, that was either the compassionate response of a caring family trying to protect their beloved Karen, or the classic industry playbook for what happens when a woman in glam dares to speak the kind of truth that could burn reputations to the ground. Was she spiraling, or was she silenced? Was it a breakdown, or a cover-up? And how did one of the most in-demand supermodels in the world, a woman who once made millions just by showing up in stilettos, end up cast aside like last season's handbag? This isn't just a story about a beautiful woman losing her mind. It's about what happens when power, beauty, trauma, and secrets collide in an industry known for posing pretty while hiding the ugliest truths in its closets. It's about glamour, yes, but also about gaslighting. It's about runways and rumors, front rows and facades. It's about substances, scandals, and the not-so-subtle ways the world punishes women who refuse to shut up and smile. This is Karen Mulder's story, and spoiler alert, it's not all lip gloss and lighting tricks. Sometimes, when a supermodel disappears, it's not the flashbulbs that fade first. It's the girl behind the image, the one who thought maybe, just maybe, she could tell the truth and still survive the spotlight. Before she became a household name in haute couture, before she was whisked away to luxury fashion shoots in private jets and dipped in diamonds for perfume ads, Karen Mulder was just a small-town girl from the chilly, salt-air corners of Normandy, France. Born in 1970 in a coastal town called Villers-sur-Mer, Karen's early life wasn't one of flashbulbs and champagne. It was bicycles and bunk beds. Her father was a civil servant, her mother a homemaker. If there were secrets and shadows in that household, the world wouldn't learn about them until much, much later. Karen was striking even then. All long limbs and sharp cheekbones before she was old enough to wear mascara. By her teens, she had that elusive thing casting agents live for, a face you can't stop looking at, even when you're not sure why. But beauty, as always, was a double-edged stiletto. At 17, on a whim, and possibly on a dare, Karen entered the Elite Model Look competition in 1987. Think of it as the Hunger Games of modeling. Thousands of girls, one golden ticket, and a handful of scouts ready to pluck their next cash cow from the crowd. Karen didn't just make an impression, she won. And overnight, she went from provincial teenager to prized asset in the world's most ruthless beauty machine. By 18, she was in Paris, not sightseeing, working, grinding, selling fantasy, all while being dressed, directed, and devoured by a system that treats teenage girls like racehorses in heels. The modeling world in the late 80s and early 90s was a fever dream of excess and exploitation. This was the era of supermodels, when names like Cindy, Naomi, and Claudia didn't just walk runways, they defined the culture. And Karen? She slipped right into that pantheon, her icy blonde looks and smouldering gaze putting her in the inner circle almost instantly. Designers loved her. Photographers adored her. Fashion magazines couldn't get enough of her. She became the go-to girl for Chanel, Versace, and Christian Dior. She was splashed across the covers of Vogue, Elle, Marie Claire, her face printed and pasted across every airport kiosk and boutique window from New York to Tokyo. And with the fame came the fortune. By her mid-20s, Karen Mulder was a millionaire many times over. She had homes in Paris, Monaco, and the French Riviera, private stylists, a glam squad on call. Access to exclusive parties where the guest list included royalty, billionaires, and more than a few questionable characters whose names never made the tabloids, but probably should have. But beneath the diamonds and designer gowns, something darker festered. Because, like so many girls who grow up too fast and too beautiful, Karen was a magnet, not just for admirers, but for manipulators. There were whispers that she was being managed in ways that blurred the line between professional and predatory, that certain powerful figures in the industry took a special interest in her career, and not just for her walk. Some rumors, still unconfirmed, hint at early experiences of coercion, where Karen, still a teenager, was allegedly invited to exclusive retreats where wealthy clients and industry elites mingled behind closed doors. Some of these rumors include coded talk of intimate coercion, the kind no one dared speak of publicly. Not back then. And if you think this all sounds a little too eyes wide shut, well, you're not alone. Multiple insiders have alluded to the same storylines: quiet grooming, subtle manipulation, and the unspoken price of success in an industry that thrives on silence. But Karen, at this stage, wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Or so it looked. She was dating pop stars, moguls, European aristocrats. One of her earliest relationships, according to press reports, was with French singer Claude Moine, known professionally as Eddie Mitchell, though the age gap and power dynamic raised eyebrows even at the time. Later, she would reportedly date billionaire Italian playboy Gianluca Casiraghi, a member of Monaco's royal-adjacent jet set. These weren't relationships rooted in stability. They were headlines, glamorous on the outside, deeply chaotic within. But to the outside world, she was living the dream. A French fantasy with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Karen Mulder was the moment, and like all it girls, she was expected to smile, pose, and never ever break the illusion. But behind the flawless facade, there were cracks already forming. Cracks she tried to fill with shopping sprees, substance-fueled nights, and a revolving door of lovers, stylists, and pseudo-friends with champagne breath and sticky fingers. And slowly, subtly, the it girl started to slip. By the late 90s, Karen Mulder had walked every runway that mattered. She'd posed for campaigns dripping in jewels, modeled lingerie so decadent it belonged behind velvet ropes, and rubbed bronzed shoulders with the likes of Helena Christensen, Tyra Banks, and Linda Evangelista. She was a global icon, a tabloid darling, a luxury product of the fashion meat grinder. But behind those piercing blue eyes, something was starting to unravel. The first signs were barely whispers. Karen began turning down jobs, disappearing from key events, showing up to shoots late or not at all. Rumors swirled as they do, and the fashion world, notoriously unforgiving, began to tighten the noose. No one ever says it out loud, but there's a silent rule in high fashion. If you stop being easy to control, you stop being profitable. Some said she was burnt out. Others whispered she was unstable. And a few, the ones closer to the fire, suggested something far darker, that Karen was medicated without consent, possibly coerced into silence and perhaps even blackballed for trying to speak out. Now this is where the story veers from glamorous to deeply disturbing. In 2001, Karen gave an interview on French television that shocked the nation. Sitting in a chair, visibly unpolished and emotionally raw, she made bombshell accusations against some of the most powerful men in fashion and entertainment. She claimed she had been intimately abused, more than once, by men at the very top of the industry, men who were supposed to protect her career but allegedly preyed on her vulnerability. She named names, some of them instantly recognizable. She said she'd been pressured, controlled, even medicated against her will to keep her compliant. She painted a picture of a system built on manipulation, gaslighting, and silence, and she, a once glowing supermodel, was now its discarded collateral. The press called it a meltdown. The industry called it a cry for help. But behind the headlines, the response was chillingly coordinated. Just days later, Karen Mulder was institutionalized. The official narrative? She was suffering from exhaustion and mental health issues. But critics, and quite a few conspiracy-minded commentators, saw something far more sinister. A public figure who had flown too close to the truth and was swiftly neutralized. They say the fashion industry chews up girls and spits them out, but in Karen's case it looked more like she was buried alive, under designer gowns, diamond contracts, and non-disclosure agreements. And the timing of her hospitalization raised more than a few well-groomed eyebrows. Friends claimed she hadn't been in crisis until after she tried to expose what happened to her. There were murmurs that she had been over-treated by professionals with connections to the very people she had accused. Some even whispered that Karen was sent to the clinic not to heal, but to forget. The word conspiracy gets tossed around too easily these days. But in Karen's case, it wasn't just internet sleuths buzzing. There were former colleagues, journalists, even fellow models quietly saying the same thing. This girl was silenced, and the media, they ate it up. Karen became a punchline. Crazy Karen, they called her. Her pain was packaged as entertainment. Her trauma turned into tabloid fodder. And the men she'd accused, they just kept working. Still, Karen didn't vanish completely. She tried to claw her way back. In 2003, she attempted a music career, releasing an album that was more whispered than heard. The lyrics, laced with sadness, longing, and eerie references to control and lost innocence. It wasn't a hit. The public wasn't ready to take her seriously again. She did a few talk shows. She gave the occasional interview, but she wasn't the Karen of the 90s anymore. The sparkle had dimmed. The fashion world, which once bathed her in flashbulbs and praise, now looked right through her. And still, the rumors persisted, that Karen knew too much, that she had stories she hadn't yet told, that certain handlers had worked overtime to ensure her silence. In later interviews, she seemed both lucid and haunted, like someone who had seen the machine from the inside and barely crawled out. It wasn't just her career that had crumbled, it was her identity. After the headlines faded and the runway lights dimmed, Karen Mulder was left standing in the wreckage of her own legacy. Dazed, humiliated, and almost forgotten. The early 2000s weren't kind. The media had moved on to newer, shinier scandal magnets, reality stars, pop princesses, and rising models who hadn't yet tried to blow the whistle on anyone powerful. Karen, who had once been front row fabulous, was now relegated to punchlines and whispered references in fashion documentaries. The girl who had once walked for Dior and posed for Vogue was now being discussed in hushed tones as that one who went a little, you know. But Karen didn't disappear completely. She just retreated. She left Paris. She stayed out of the spotlight. Friends say she became intensely private, surrounding herself with only the most trusted allies, and even they didn't hear from her often. She reportedly spent time in the south of France doing the one thing supermodels are never really allowed to do, rest. And just like that, she became a ghost. Except this ghost had unfinished business. In 2003, Karen made a brief, and somewhat bizarre comeback attempt. She launched a music album under the Universal label, a soft, melancholy pop collection that barely made a blip in France, let alone globally. The lead single? A cover of I Am What I Am. Subtle? Not exactly. It sounded less like a pop anthem and more like a quiet scream from someone begging to be understood on her own terms. She also gave an interview around that time, soft-spoken, carefully controlled, almost too polished. It was as if she had been prepped within an inch of her life, coached to say the right things and nothing else. She dismissed the earlier explosive claims with phrases like, "I wasn't well," or "I was going through something." It was all vague, sanitized and deeply sad. It was as if the world needed Karen to be one of two things, crazy or cured, and she didn't have the energy left to argue. But beneath that polished exterior, some say the real story remained, that Karen hadn't lied, that the industry had simply won, that the system had closed ranks and steamrolled her into compliance, that her so-called reinvention was less about healing and more about survival. The modeling industry is built on illusions, after all. And Karen, she was now both a cautionary tale and a liability. Years passed. Occasionally she'd surface, blurry paparazzi shots, a mention in an article, a brief blog post here and there. Always elusive, always slightly out of reach, like a dream someone else had. And then came the whispers again. Rumors that Karen had tried to publish a tell-all book but was shut down, that she'd been offered hush money, that certain lawsuits had been quietly handled. All unconfirmed, of course. The kind of gossip that thrives when silence lingers too long. But then there were the facts. The way her career vanished right after she spoke out. The sudden hospitalization. The studio-polished retractions. The eerie pattern seen in other industries when women dare to name names. And let's not forget, Karen wasn't the only one. Other models from that era, some publicly, some behind closed doors, echoed similar experiences. The parties, the substances, the pressure, the unspoken rules, the older men with all the power and the teenage girls with no one to protect them. Karen Mulder simply said it first, and loudly. Today she lives in near total obscurity. No Instagram, no tell-alls, no second act as a podcasting girl boss. And maybe that's by choice. Or maybe, just maybe, the price of speaking her truth was total erasure. Was Karen unstable? Possibly. Was she medicated without her full consent? Could be. Did she unravel under the weight of fame? Maybe. Or was she one of the only ones brave or reckless enough to say out loud what others only dared to whisper? And what does it say about the industry and the world that when she did speak up, she was so swiftly packaged as delusional and then discarded? Karen Mulder didn't burn out like other 90s stars. She was dismantled, piece by piece, then quietly stored away like an archive no one wants to reopen. But here's the thing about archives. Eventually, someone always comes looking. She said she was used. She said she was discarded. She said she was intimately violated by powerful men and then quietly silenced. But who were these men? Karen Mulder never dropped names on live TV, at least not in the version the world got to see. That infamous 2001 interview with French TV host Thierry Ardisson was recorded, then swiftly buried. Airing it, the producers said, would be irresponsible. Karen, they claimed, was unstable, medicated, hysterical. Her words weren't reliable. But whispers travel faster than satellite broadcasts, and the footage may have been locked in a vault, but the rumors escaped, crawling into gossip columns, shady internet forums, and even the darker corners of Parisian high society. And while Karen never officially outed her abusers, the world began to guess. Connect the right dots, and a chilling picture emerges. Let's talk about the rumored, unconfirmed, and totally unproven cast of characters Karen might have been alluding to. And yes, just to be absolutely clear, this is all speculation. But the kind of speculation that feels just a little too specific to fully ignore. Let's start with royalty. because of course. In the late 90s, Karen Mulder was photographed more than once in the company of Prince Albert of Monaco. Europe's most eligible royal bachelor and a known playboy, Albert had a thing for models, and Karen had a habit of turning up at the kind of exclusive events where monarchs and moguls rubbed elbows with leggy blondes in couture. The gossip pages were already buzzing with speculation about the nature of their relationship when Karen's breakdown happened. So when the accusations came, vague, shadowy, unrecorded, some people whispered his name. Was he part of the problem? There's no evidence, but there was proximity, a lot of it, enough to raise eyebrows, and in certain late-night tabloid circles, suspicions. Next on the list, the mysterious photographers. Yes, plural. Karen claimed that she had been intimately assaulted during a photo shoot under the influence of substances she didn't knowingly take. Now, the fashion world isn't exactly known for its HR department. It's a place where rules bend for art, and powerful men often operate behind the safety of a lens. She never said who. But the timelines, the whispers, and the eerily similar stories from other models over the years got people talking. Names like Terry Richardson, known for his so-called edgy shoots and later exposed for predatory behavior, were thrown around. Not by Karen, but by others trying to connect the dots. Another name, Mario Testino, was accused of misconduct by other models years later. Again, Karen never pointed to him. But in the court of public curiosity, people love a pattern. And then there were the suits. Karen Mulder was repped by Elite Model Management, a mega agency with more power in fashion than most prime ministers have in their own countries. Its founder, John Casablancas, was known for grooming underage models and even married one of them. The modeling world was, and still is, a candy store for men with money and influence. Karen claimed she had been loaned out to elite clients, that she'd been used at private parties, that the beautiful glossy world of fashion had a dirty underbelly, and she'd seen it up close. She never publicly accused Casablancas, but her vague allusions to being passed around by agents with connections to billionaires, it doesn't take a true crime degree to draw your own conclusions. And then there's the hypnotist. Yes, really. Karen claimed she had been hypnotized, manipulated into compliance, by a therapist recommended to her by none other than her then boyfriend, acclaimed French director Claude Lelouch. According to her, this so-called therapist tried to gaslight her, erase her memories, and condition her into forgetting what had been done to her. Sound like a plot twist? That's because it is. But she said it happened. The hypnotist's name was never made public, but some journalists attempted to trace him back to elite clinics with ties to the French film industry, and others claimed this mysterious figure may have played a role in her eventual involuntary hospitalization. But what happened to the men she may have been talking about? That's the darker part of the story. Almost nothing. No lawsuits, no arrests, no exposés, just carefully worded denials, or more often, deafening silence. Most of the people whispered about in these rumors went on to continue their lives and careers. Some were later accused of misconduct by other models. Some simply faded into obscurity, their reputations intact, their power undisturbed. And Karen? She was the one locked away, sedated, discredited, declared unstable by a system she tried to expose. It's hard not to wonder, did she speak too much truth for the industry to tolerate? Or was she truly unraveling under the pressure of fame, trauma, and mismanagement? Maybe it's both. Maybe she really was medicated and spiraling because of what had happened to her. It's not a stretch to say that some very powerful people had a vested interest in making Karen's accusations disappear. Permanently. So who did she mean when she said she'd been used and discarded? We may never know for sure. But in the modeling world, where secrets are currency and silence is survival, her story stands out like a cautionary fairy tale. A tall, impossibly glamorous woman who dared to say the quiet part out loud, and was locked away for it. You don't become a supermodel in the 90s by accident. It wasn't just good bone structure or the right haircut. It was timing, luck, and the kind of ambition that burns hotter than a spotlight. For Karen Mulder, all of those collided when she left her quiet Dutch life behind and landed in the glittering mouth of the beast, the international fashion world. And make no mistake, beast is exactly the right word. Because for all its sparkle and seduction, fashion isn't soft. It's not tender. It's an industry that eats its young and chews slowly. A world where girls as young as 14 are flown to foreign cities, dressed in couture that costs more than their parents' homes, and told to act sexy for photographers twice their age. Karen entered that world in the early 90s, the height of the supermodel era. This was the age of Naomi, Cindy, Linda, Claudia, when the models were household names, not just walking clothes hangers. They had contracts, covers, campaigns. They weren't just faces, they were forces. But power in that world was never truly theirs. It belonged to the men behind the scenes. The agents, the photographers, the editors, the clients. They pulled the strings, they signed the checks, and in too many cases, they decided which girls got cast and which girls got invited. To the after-parties where boundaries blurred and favors were expected. For Karen, the climb was meteoric. One day, she was competing in a local modeling contest. The next, she was on the cover of Vogue, being flown to exotic islands draped in diamonds and told she was the next big thing. She was earning millions. Living in Paris, invited to every gala. And yet, from the very beginning, there were whispers. Whispers about the parties. About certain powerful clients who didn't just want a pretty face in their ads, they wanted one in their bed. About substances offered like breath mints backstage. About the girls who smiled on the runway but cried in the dressing room after being mentored by men 3 times their age. This wasn't unique to Karen. It was the culture. And while most of the world just saw glamour, champagne flutes and flashbulbs, inside the industry, it was open secret. If you were young, beautiful and obedient, you got rewarded. If you made noise, asked questions or said no too many times, you disappeared. Karen, for a long time, played the game. She smiled, she posed, she worked like a machine. But under the makeup and the designer gowns, something was unraveling. Behind the scenes, she began speaking to a therapist, someone who, according to her later claims, didn't just listen, but allegedly hypnotized her. That therapist, Karen said, helped her remember things. Or maybe planted them. Or maybe both. We don't know for sure. But what she did know, or at least believe, was that she had been used. By powerful people. People in fashion, people in politics, people who smiled for the same cameras that had once adored her. And when she tried to tell her story, the system that made her turned on her like a bad facelift. One interview. That's all it took. And suddenly, the Karen Mulder who once sold perfume and lingerie was locked in a hospital, branded unstable, her story buried deeper than a cancelled cover shoot. The people around her, stylists, agents, even family, either distanced themselves or claimed concern for her mental state. The industry issued no statements. The brands she once fronted offered no comment. Silence, as always, did the heavy lifting. But here's where the pattern gets chilling. Karen wasn't alone. Years later, other models began coming forward. Not just about sleazy agents or casting couch photographers, but about systemic abuse, long-term grooming, coercion, emotional and intimate manipulation. Some named names, some didn't, but their stories echoed Karen's, not word for word, but close enough to send a chill down your spine. In hindsight, Karen wasn't the first, but she may have been one of the earliest to scream into the void, and for that, she was erased. Today, we understand this dynamic better. We've seen the Me Too movement shake industries. We've watched once untouchable names fall from grace. But in Karen's time, there was no platform, no safety, no language even to name what was happening, just whispers and rumors. and women like her cast aside the moment they stopped being useful. The fashion industry, for all its glossy branding, is notoriously opaque. Agencies operate in shadows. Models, often teenagers from rural towns, are shipped off to foreign cities with little oversight and immense pressure. They're expected to be thin but not weak, sexy but not vulgar, confident but never demanding. And if they crack, they're broken, dismissed, replaced. Karen cracked. Or maybe Karen woke up. Maybe she started asking questions that weren't supposed to be asked. Maybe she tried to bite the hand that fed her, only to learn it could bite back harder. What's terrifying isn't just what happened to her, but how easily it could happen again. Because while the faces may change and the runways might look more inclusive now, the power structures remain. The same types of men still sit at the top. The same money still moves the same mountains. And the models, they're still expected to play nice. So when Karen Mulder vanished from the spotlight, it wasn't because she stopped being beautiful. It's because she stopped being silent. And if her story is uncomfortable, confusing, or incomplete, maybe that's exactly the point. Maybe we're not supposed to have all the answers. Maybe the whole system is built to ensure we never do. Because in the world of fashion, truth is the one thing that never goes out of style, but it's also the one thing no one wants on the record. After the headlines faded, after the tabloids got bored, after the camera flashes moved on to newer, shinier faces, Karen Mulder did something radical. She disappeared. Not in the glamorous, she ran off with a prince kind of way. Not in the tragic, she vanished without a trace sort of way. No. Karen slid into the shadows in that quiet, uncomfortable space where public interest dims but the pain doesn't. Her name stopped appearing in fashion magazines. The designers who once clawed each other to dress her now acted like she never existed. For the average person, Karen became a ghost of the 90s, filed somewhere between runway nostalgia and tabloid trivia. But for those who paid attention, the silence wasn't peace, it was strategy. After being institutionalized in 2001, reportedly at the insistence of her father and sister, following a televised interview where she named names and broke the unspoken rules, Karen emerged with a different kind of presence. Careful, quiet, controlled. Like someone who had learned what happens when you dare speak against the empire. She gave only the safest interviews. Chose her words with surgeon-like precision. She hinted at manipulation, spoke of abuses of power in her early career. But the explosive accusations? The specific names she once dared whisper into a TV microphone? Those were gone, tucked back into the vault of the unspeakable. It was as if the world had decided her breakdown had been a hallucination. That nothing she said could possibly be real, because to believe it was real would mean tearing open the belly of an entire industry and letting the rot spill out. And so the fashion world moved on. The cameras pointed elsewhere. The invitations stopped coming. Behind those shuttered doors, the same editors, designers, and power agents who had once built her up. The same men, and some women, whose names were barely concealed in the rumors that still drift through fashion parties like expensive smoke. Karen wasn't exiled, she was erased. Then in 2007 she gave birth to a daughter, a soft, quiet chapter in a life written almost entirely in chaos. The father's name was never made public. The child was kept out of the spotlight. There were no paparazzi shots of Karen pushing a pram through Paris, no glossy magazine spreads, no brand deals, just silence, and maybe, for once, peace. She has remained mostly out of sight ever since. No memoir, no Netflix docuseries, no big comeback. Just a few scattered sightings, often in the south of France, looking like a woman who had been through the fire and lived to tell the story, but chose not to. Some called it healing. Others whispered it was part of the deal. A deal to stay quiet. A deal to stay safe. Because in Karen's story, the silence is never just silence. It's a character all its own, a looming presence, a velvet curtain pulled tight across something ugly, powerful, and possibly still active. But even in the shadows, questions still burn. Why did her own family have her committed, just days after her allegations? Was it concern or damage control? What happened to the so-called hypnotist who allegedly extracted her memories or implanted them? Were there backroom settlements? Was someone paid to keep the story buried? Or did Karen finally decide that the cost of telling the truth was simply too high? No one knows for sure. And that, maybe, is the darkest part of all. Because in an industry that thrives on illusion, Karen Mulder was one of the rare ones who tried to show the cracks, who stood still while the curtain was yanked open. And when she did, the machine that had once worshipped her turned cold. She was no longer useful, no longer sellable, so she was made invisible. Today, Karen remains a quiet enigma. No public drama, no scandals, just a question mark in designer heels. And maybe that's exactly how she wants it. Maybe in her silence, there's power. Maybe there's safety. Maybe there's even healing. But for the rest of us, for the ones who watched, wondered, and remember, she remains something else entirely. Proof that behind the glittering facade of fashion's elite, there are stories too dangerous to tell, and women who paid the price for trying.